Hello, I'm Claudine Voyazis. I am a member of the EES board, and I have the pleasure to present our next speaker, Frans Leeuw. Frans Leeuw, who has played a very important role in EES because he is one of the founding members of EES, and he has been president for a couple of years. Presently, Frans Leeuw is professor at the Maastricht University, and he is also the director of the Netherlands Center for Netherlands Research Center for Justice and Security. Frans Leeuw is going to speak, as you can see, about theory and evaluation, integration or better integration of theory within evaluation practice. Frans, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. At this time of the day, Mr. Chairman, talk about theories on a Friday in Brussels with a strike. I see a lot of people already leaving, so. And then I make some, commercial, although we never make any money out of this, but actually, I want to talk a little bit about this book and a little further. This book, which I edited together with my distinguished colleague Jos Vaassen in row 10, now at UNESCO and at Maastricht University, but in which Nicoletta has a chapter on the relationship between evaluation and American sociology. Bob Picciotto has a chapter on evaluation, social sciences and development. Ray Pawson, I haven't seen him, he has a chapter. Sandra Speer has a chapter on Nobel Prize laureates in economics and what we do not learn from economics. Rob Schwartz from Canada, he couldn't make it today, otherwise he would have been here to see how I sell this book. But this is all a joke. This is my topic today. My topic today is to talk about, well, this is again, you have it a little bit more, it's a little bit impression management, although the quality of the scan was not that good. Probably that's what the publishing company does. They make it in such a way that when you make a scan out of it, they really start to really make it difficult for you. I want to talk about today about the gap between the development and the growth of knowledge in social science research disciplines, psychology, economics, sociology, political science. Increasingly, dear friends, although we only pay a couple of sentences on that, the development of cognitive and neurosciences, where you have to work with interventions in the field of education or crime and justice. You really have to be almost a neuroscientist nowadays. Talk about the gap between what is taking place in terms of progress of knowledge in these disciplines versus what the practice of evaluation is doing with that. And, to be honest, we talk about the gap, and that is not considered a very good thing, a gap. I'll come to that later. Now, if we talk about progress of knowledge or theoretical growth of knowledge, you have to think about, the increased information that we have on, behavior and institutions. We increased role of cognitive factors in social processes, but also developments that are really rapidly have been taking place over the years in behavioral economics, law and economics, but also in historical studies. And that is very close to political science. If you think about past dependencies, how societies evolve. There's a lot of very good work going on in the field of economics. I'll come to that in a minute. A lot of good work is going on, even when it deals with markets. Of course, methodology. I mean, we talked this morning a little bit awkward on evidence-based policy and experiments. I mean, nobody is referring, you haven't done it, and my two distinguished colleagues haven't done it, on realist evaluation, where, theoretical developments are taking really a very important place, and there are nowadays a lot of RCTs that take into account theoretical developments, plus all the other developments in the world of designs. And, for example, in a field that really interests me myself, software helping you to unpack mechanisms underlying programs, argument visualization software is something that was developed in the IT world. But to be honest, how many times do we see these types of progress of knowledge in our journals or reports? So that is the suggestion of the day. I would like to do the following, but please, if you start to really disagree, you just stand up, don't go, but throw a little tomato or something else, then I'm on the alert. I want to do three things. First, talk about a couple of indicators or symptoms of the gap. The second thing I want to do is to give some explanations for the gap. And the final thing is to suggest, if I have some time, to suggest some well, solutions. There are no solutions, but ideas how to reduce the gap. Indicators and symptoms. The first indicator, I mean, there are many more. The first indicator is by the former EES member Sandra Speer, who did a very interesting paper in which she summarized in this book what Nobel Prize laureates over the years in economics have produced in terms of core findings, core theories, sometimes core methods, versus what is going on in the practice of evaluation alltagtäglich. Many insights, explanations, and mechanisms produced by these economists are very relevant for evaluators, but are not or only in a very limited way acknowledged or used. By the way, on the other hand, one has to say, and I think that's what Sandra is also saying, that economists not always love us. For those of you from Switzerland, you know perfectly well Bruno Frey, who recently, well, a couple of years ago, published a nice paper on Evaluitis, a new disease, eine neue Krankheit. Now, Bruno Frey is a very famous, maybe even to come Nobel Prize winner, but he is not very much in love with us, although in a number of his works he turns out to be much more in love than you think. So what you can pick up from Sandra's paper is that work that economists have been doing on market design theories, a couple of years ago, the Nobel Prize, or last year, or not this year, but last year, Ostrom's work on managing the commons and common pool resources, common property regimes, very, very important. But also public choice economists who constantly focus on, rent-seeking behavior by public sector officials, fiscal illusion, sunk cost, wonderful mechanism, the curse of bad knowledge, knowing it just a little bit, but thinking that you know it all, and I'll scratch your back, you're mine. All these mechanisms that economists have produced. Dear colleagues, again, be honest. How many times do we find papers on government failures, where we are very good in detecting government failures, that are linked up with this knowledge fund? Not very many. The second example, performance measurement and theories. Again, from this nice little book. It was done by Rob Schwartz. Rob Schwartz, he looked into a large database, research base, article base on studies dealing with performance management. And one of his conclusions is that when evaluations take place of performance management and reform interventions, they rarely examine outcomes or impacts, and now it comes, they make sparse use of what the disciplines have to offer in terms of theories and mechanisms employed by performance auditors. The final words in Schwartz's paper are, quote, the findings of this study, of his study, of my study, but it's his study, reiterate the call for a long-term theory-focused evaluation agenda to replace the short-term piloting evaluation mode favored by most governments. So these are two examples. Bob Picciotto refers to a couple of others, and a number of other people also address the mind the gap problem. Of course, outside this book, so now I can put it away. If you take it, be aware, God sees everything. So, now, outside this book, a couple of, well, not a couple, many, but I only give you a couple of other serious empirical investigations show that there is that gap. For example, he is not here, but he is 20 kilometers away. Victor Putt working at the University of Leuven, the Catholic University of Leuven, has shown in his dissertation on performance auditing of several West European national audit offices that there is a discrepancy between the theories about determinants of organizational effectiveness and behavior used by the audit offices versus what economic and social science research has put together, has summarized. Elements like organizational culture, exchange behavior between organizations and members of the organizations, motivation and leadership, but also insights like processes like adverse selection and principal-agent relationships are never and nowhere to be found in the norms and so-called theories that audit officers, supreme audit officers apply. So again, a field that is not very strongly related. Most recently, very recently, American colleagues Mel Mark, Stuart Donaldson and Bernadette Campbell, probably not the daughter of the American experimental psychologist that we have heard many times, but I haven't met her, so I don't know, recently published a book on the relationship between social psychology and evaluation. Very nice book, really can recommend it. They do not use the word gap, but they refer to the term split. There is a split between these two worlds. The authors start with a wonderful example, how close the relationship once was. And they look to a study published in 1947 by the famous, then famous, now even more famous, Kurt Lewin and some others. One of the others was Margaret Mead. Can you imagine? You know, Margaret Mead, Kurt Lewin, and evaluation. That was a combination in those years. Well, they looked into, and I know we're coming close to lunch, so this example is terrible. They looked into the problem of a possible food shortage in the US during World War II. The study was published in 47, done in 44. Lewin was asked to analyze that problem. The food shortage had to do with the fact that the domestic meat supply in the United States was shipped abroad to the Allies and to the soldiers, creating a concern that the Americans itself, and this was long before obesity, had not enough for the domestic consumption. The policy goal was to have Americans eat more, take care, hearts, brains, intestines, and heads. But they also knew that there was a problem, that the Americans wouldn't do that. So there was a policy, and they asked Kurt Lewin to think about the policy. They gave him some suggestions. He reconstructed the policy, and he tested that policy and ran into the conclusion that what was not taken into account, the perception and the perspective of American people and folks and groups, what is meant when you eat meat. So he suggested, in line with what Mel Mark and Stuart Donaldson call a foreshadow of theory-driven evaluations, not only a better theory to underpin the possibility and let's say the goal to eat more heads, intestines, brains, etc., but also he suggested the policymakers with ways to evaluate it. And to cut a long story short, I will not tell you whether they started to eat more heads, brains, etc., simply because the war was over a year later and there were no problems anymore. But this was a wonderful old experience and old, let's say, situation. Now, the Mark and Donaldson book, you see it's still there, gives many more examples also over the years, but in particular it shows the split where these disciplines have drifted apart. So, dear colleagues, so far so good, or maybe I should say so far so bad. Let me share with you some explanations. The first explanation has to do with the institutionalization, and in that way there is a link with my good friend Vedung, the institutionalization of evaluation over the last 50 years. And in fact, the core argument of this is the emancipation of evaluation in a public sector mode, with public sector money, with public sector rules and agreements and commissioning and public sector money, and the, let's say, linking evaluation over the years much more stronger to public administration, to public policy, and make it a part of day-to-day practice has, as one explanation, caused the gap to exist. Because, you know, in the world of let's say day-to-day, or what some people call short-termism, even when it is ongoing evaluations, they can also be on a short term. You have to be any moment ready. Maybe despite the fact that your explanatory theory is not ready yet. You have to deliver. That is one of the causes of let's say, creating or building this gap. A couple of years ago, I did with Jan-Erik Verrubo a paper on evaluation systems, also called evaluation machines. We didn't use that word, but it was another Danish colleague. And these evaluation systems, they are, institutionalized systems of collecting data. They have their own epistemology. They have their own data. A big place for thinking about theories, mechanisms, is not there. So that's one explanation. I hope you disagree, because that would be good. Second explanation is the lack of explanations in evaluations. Let me quote, she was quoted one more time this morning. Carol Weiss, already in 1979, said, process evaluations are not very different from what is often called monitoring. Describing processes, however, is not the same as explaining what is happening. And then she said, when evaluators try to give explanations, evaluators, but in particular auditors, and I think she's very right in that, they don't come very far. How many times you have seen audit reports that find that this room is too hot, that they say it has to do with the central heating system, and that they recommend it should be less hot. Okay? That's the way we can go. Unfortunately, increasingly my opinion is that in reports published by evaluators that have that management approach strongly integrated in their work, start to do the same. A third explanation, dear friends, is probably for some of you reason to leave the room. That has to do with the relative chaos when working with theories in evaluation and working with evaluation theories. Take care. What I'm going to do is be very unpolite and very critical, but sometimes you have to do that. You know, there is an economic theory on the discount rate in behavior of people. When you are so old as I am, you can be easier in saying these bad things, in particular when you publish yourself all the time, than when you are 29 and you start to say what I'm going to tell you now, because that probably leads to a different career path, and it's called the discount rate theory. So I'll leave it to the president of the European Evaluation Society to elect the president to come after the current president to come to make that a young lady of 27. You know, that will be wonderful. This is a joke. Okay, evaluation theories. I'm sure that you know what evaluation theories are. The evaluation theory is, and I'm quoting here, I could quote many people. I quote Shadish here. He says evaluation theories, that are statements that identify and explain feasible practices of evaluators that evaluators can use to construct knowledge of the value of social programs. Evaluation theory provides the conceptual framework for assessing the effectiveness of evaluation practice. And it comprises of 5 components. Very short, there's no need to keep that in mind all the time. It's knowledge, it's use, it's social programming, it's value, and it's practice. That's evaluation theories. So, I mean, this looks like it is clear. But if you open up the candy box of what evaluation theories are, you see quite an interesting, not only subtypes that I will show you in a minute, but you also see something else. You see that what is seen as an evaluation theory is a concept that combines rather different things. Causal statements, there is normative statements, there is predictive statements, and there is use. For me, trained as a Popperian realist and realist evaluator, this rather grand concept of evaluation theory is rather difficult to digest and understand. Moreover, it is almost a Fundgrube or a mer à boire for evaluators to pick and choose what they want. A little bit of value, a few bits of epistemology, a little social programming, and we call it an evaluation theory. To make it a little bit more complicated, there are some subtypes. Now, I was trained that in the belief system, in the philosophy or epistemology, what you want to call it, that if you start to work with subtypes, they should be really distinct. Let's say you must be able to really good, let's say, make them separate. So you have here, for example, the first subsystem is, and I apologize, the page is too small, theories about the practice of evaluation. That's not the same as evaluation theory, because that only talks about theory of practice. Theories about implementation and change. That is, in fact, not theory of change. I'll come to that in a minute. That is what, let's say, academics, to use Verdung's statement, have produced on diffusion of innovations and that kind of stuff. So that's different. But we also have evaluation models. The great Stoffelbeam, with his book on 26 evaluation models, including, the first model is the pseudo-evaluation. It's model, sometimes it's called a paradigm, sometimes it's called a theory, sometimes it's called an approach. So that is also taking place in the debate on evaluation theories, but it's not the same. And then we have, and the roots were already on, I think it was again Verdung who showed Malth-Arvid, we also have evaluators theories. That are theories of very famous American evaluators. This is an example. So here you see, person, Stoffelbeam himself, Patton, Campbell, Suchman, Baruch, Rossi, etc., etc. I remember an activity that was initiated by some Swedish colleagues from Magdalena University, where we tried for Europe to make an evaluators theory, tree. We couldn't do it because in Europe there are less famous individual evaluators. We are more in terms of schools. Anyway, so you have evaluation models, theory of this, theory of that, evaluation theories, and you have evaluators theories. I'm bringing you a little bit into the jungle to come, but there is, a little bit later, there is lunch. For those of you that were starting to get angry, and where is theory-driven evaluation or program theory evaluation? Yes, it's coming. This is a kind of overarching, the first thing is a kind of overarching analysis combining a lot of different ingredients into what is called evaluation theory. Program theory, theory-driven evaluation is different. That starts with the policymaker. That starts with the practitioner. That starts with the, can be even the consumer or the client. It starts with the office manager. And the focus is to reconstruct, test, and sometimes help or expand the theory. It looks simple, I would say, but now we go. Cross your heart. So we have intervention theories. We have the theory of change. Is that the same? Maybe for the very en vogue, very well-seasoned evaluator who is 65, who has been there, done it, seen it, he or she knows that there is a big congruency between these. But, you know, other people, they think, my theory of change and theory in use. And I'm happy to not share with you the espoused theory. That's a theory that the policymaker tells you if the policymaker is able to tell you something. Sometimes they are not able. Theory in use is what they really have inside, but we're not there yet. We have the program logic. Wow, is that the same? In some papers it's called the same. In the paper that I just did with my distinguished Brad Pitt Asbury from Australia in the American Journal of Evaluation, we really beat the shit out of the idea that program logic and logic models and logical frameworks is similar to theory-driven, let's say, to program theories. It's totally different. But, you know, it's in the same language. It's in the same discourse. I'm not finishing yet. Logic models. And then we have, for the development aid folks, but now that's almost everywhere, the logical frameworks. Wow, it's difficult. And then we have Verdung himself, who in the Journal of Evaluation said there is a particular stakeholder-driven theory of evaluation, of programs. Wow, here we go. We're not there yet. Oh yeah, just a couple of, this is only artists. There's nothing relevant in it. So if you probably you are not, if you are amongst the producers of these program logic models, then I apologize, but that's it. Okay? This one I like the best, you know. Unbelievable. There is not one mechanism inside, and we all believe this. And commissioners, they like it sometimes, although they know better. We're not yet there, because, dear friends, so you have evaluation theory, you have the program theory / theory-driven evaluation, but where it all came from, explanatory theories. Call it scientific theories. Call it, because here is also a little subset, the middle range theories by the famous Robert King Merton. The theories that are produced by academics, sometimes by evaluators themselves, let's say Rosette, cognitive theory. Some of the examples that I refer to in the book, in the chapter that was done by Sandra Speer. Originally, but I hardly dare to say that, scientific theories. Theories that are strong on informative content and that have really something to say. I mean, evaluators sometimes use these explanatory theories, but, well, what is the end of my story? The end of, oh, by the way, but this is really, I apologize, because this is a very nice URL. It's maybe I can show it better in the next slide. This is a URL where you go to, and it summarizes in very short statements, sometimes too short, the core of some 50 explanatory theories from social psychology, economics, etc. And it is called Changing Minds. That is because theories often have something to say about what makes people think and behave and what makes people change and behave. So that's just for the, let's say, for fun. But this picture is, for me, one of the explanations why we have that gap between research, on the one hand, growth of knowledge in these fields, and call it evaluation, practice, on the other hand. And for me, the reason is simple, and I mean, very often walk into that, you know, then somebody is sending me an email or calling or whatever it is, telling me I'm doing an evaluation now on smoking cessation programs, or on how to reduce juvenile delinquency, or you name it. But I need to have some theory. Can you give me some suggestions? You know, these poor people, in particular when they're between 20 and 58, you know, after that, we have to solve our own problems. But, I mean, it is very, very difficult. It is very difficult because you can pick and choose what you want. And if I disagree with one thing that my distinguished colleague, sociologist Stame, this morning, at least made that impression, this is to help you for the debate this afternoon, that is that in your approach is a little bit pick and choose, you know, stakeholders, individuals, etc., etc. Where is the growth of knowledge in the disciplines? And you should never allow somebody to pick and choose, oh, today I'm constructivist and tomorrow, no. So this is a little bit, I put it a little bit sharp, but we'll discuss this afternoon. So this is explanation 3. Dear friends, oh yeah, this statement I don't want to, I really can't forget about it. This was published in 2005. Sociologists, what I am, tend to use theory in a bewildering variety of ways. It can refer to anything from an ontology to a causal model. And I thought, could one of us have written the same statement for evaluation? You see, there is no name, no reference, so it has never been written, but I think we could do this. But we could add a little bit more, a strategy, a role model, and you fill in whatever it is. Sociology was almost bankrupt when they had too much pluralism, and in particular pseudo-pluralism in their theories. Luckily, that's now gone. Okay, so I'm coming to the end, dear Mr. Chairman, dear President, because, you know, today, 2 December, Friday, talking about theories, there's no need for me to bring you into a joint depression. That nothing works in theories with regard to evaluation. While we have crisis all around. We are books are being written on evaluation in turbulent times by the famous Ray Risk Group. We have models, we have approaches that Verdun was just discussing. So I want to add positive, definitely. And the answer is, to me, I would say, more easy than we might think. First, be more precise in using the concept of theory. This is a task for commissioners, for editors of journals, for leaders. Here we go, Evert. We have field of evaluation. It should not be, I think, it should not be continued that everybody has his or her own little theory of little this or little that. According to, and there you see Carl Raymond Popper and realist evaluations, according to that line of thought, a theory is belonging to world 3. World 1 is for the emotions, world 2 is for, the day-to-day things, and world 3, what Popper calls, is the objective knowledge world. Not that is objective in the sense that it is not produced by people, but a theory is on the shelf, is in a repository. And it is, I mean, you cannot say there is a Frans Leeuw theory. That's nonsense. I mean, there is a theory on this and this and this, and you can find it. If I'm dead, it's still there, or it's falsified and it's thrown away. So we have to be more precise on what we think. Secondly, very interesting, realist evaluations. They have been looking into using explanatory theories. I mean, every paper, Ray Pawson, Nick Tilley, they are in this book. Pawson is writing on where he shows that the old concept of the middle range theory is strongly related to the contemporary concept of program theories. And he shows in practice how that works. So there the world is already coming together. And Nick Tilley is showing how important criminological theories are for doing evaluations of crime prevention programs. So these realist people, they have been opening to this kind of work, and more they are going away from the idea that experiments are always very bad. Ray Pawson is a real Popperian. He says sometimes experimental evaluations are very good, sometimes they are not. So there is already a trend set. And finally, I would suggest, and I give you one example, I have 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
You've got plenty of time.
Well, okay, then we do a couple of minutes.
And hungry people.
There is a third suggestion, and I would like to share that with you with about 2 practical things. But first, what this is about. Compare and contrast these explanatory, I dare to say, but I go below the radar, scientific theories on the one hand, and the program theories that evaluators work with, or intervention theories. Try to compare and contrast in the sense, what are the mechanisms that the evaluators, that the program theory people find? What are the mechanisms that the explanatory, let's say, theoreticians think about? By the way, if you think explanatory theories, I had to say that, I forgot, that has something to do with grand theory, like the name Jürgen Habermas was referred to today, or for the older people in the room, Talcott Parsons, big, unbelievably, totally ununderstandable, not one single testable hypothesis taking into account grand systems. That's not what I talk about. Explanatory theories are systems of statements, deductive statements that can be tested and have been tested. So let's say compare and contrast these explanatory theories with intervention theories. And I think that is an interesting way to go forward. And the example that I want to share with you is, by the way, can also be found in a report that is, I think, about to be published by DG Regional Policy. They asked me to make a report on the state-of-the-art in theory-driven evaluations and impact evaluations, ex post and ex ante. And if I had some time left, I could also say something about the process evaluation. Well, that report that I've submitted to them, they will put it on the website. So in the not-too-distant future, you can read it. This is an example that I take from that report. And it is an example that is looking into the ex ante evaluation. Again, we have a difference because Verdun is not of the opinion that ex ante evaluation is evaluation, it's planning, maybe in Sweden, but maybe not everywhere else. I think that evaluations are actually very good in doing ex ante evaluations when they follow a little bit some of the suggestions that I just gave to you. Now let me take that example. You see here this terrible, what is it, bolita, perla maldita. It's a Röntgen picture of a boy coming from the Antilles, the Dutch Antilles, flying to the Netherlands, Amsterdam, with cocaine balls in his stomach. That's what's called the cocaine swallowers. They suck them in. I suggest don't try to imitate that. They fly over the ocean. They get a first-class ticket or business class. They get usually $6,000 to $8,000 or euro from organized crime, and then they sell it in the Netherlands and for the rest in Europe. Anyway, this is a real problem. So the Dutch government a couple of years ago did a 100% control everybody coming out of these planes from these regions. This is discrimination, absolutely, you're right, if you may think that, but it was very successful because it dropped. But at the sudden moment, somebody said, this is very expensive. You can imagine that, unbelievable. So somebody else thought, maybe we could do a public information campaign using some websites, some leaflets, some brochures, and this was a brochure that was developed on the basis of a UK-Jamaica experience. Okay, so there was no policy, only a policy belief. Not a policy theory, a policy belief. So there was a researcher in the Netherlands who got the question, could you say something about the possibility that this works? Because, an information campaign is much cheaper, less intrusive. You can imagine if you're coming out of the plane, you have to sit, some people had to sit on the toilet, after 8 hours flying over the ocean, then sit on the toilet because they were maybe located as a potential swallower. And if it is as effective as the 100% control, we'll do that. But the people who thought about it, they also thought, is there somebody who can evaluate this? Well, there was a person who was taking the position, said, yes, I'm going to evaluate it. What this person did, he reconstructed, although there was not much to reconstruct, the theory underlying this policy idea. And he didn't go to say, let's do a small experiment, or let's ask some of these cocaine swallowers, suppose they're still alive, what they thought about, what they think about this. No, he said, I'm going to look in the repositories of fear arousal communication theories and research. And he found 6 crucial conditions out of a bunch of studies and a bunch of theories, and a bunch of theories that were tested in these studies that were very clear, had nothing to do with the conditions that were applicable to this cocaine swallowing people. Just one example, fear arousal communication works if your life is something of value for you. But unfortunately for these young people coming over the ocean, their life is from now to tomorrow, and then they have 6,000 euros. So he found a mismatch with theoretical but empirical conditions that work in the situation of fear arousal communication in other situations, but not in this situation. Here you go. So that was reported to the folks at the, what was it, public prosecutor or something like that. They said, this is convincing. We don't go into this type of, perla maldita campaigns. Now, in this report for the EU, you find many more examples. By the way, and again, Ray Pawson is also active in that kind of work. So, dear friends, some conclusions, 2 sentences, and then I stop. If I can find my conclusions, because, they are always for the ones that really thought, when is this over? They are very important. Yes, yes, almost, we're almost there. No, I forgot the conclusions. So, what we do, as the president has indicated that it was up to the speaker to arrange anything, but it should be interactive. What is a first conclusion that some of you would like to draw from this horrible, critical, unfriendly, but I really mean it, speech?